Sound check.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the April Cairngorms National Park Authority Planning Committee meeting. For those members of the public joining us today, either virtually or in person, I am Chris Beattie of the Cairngorms National Park Authority Planning Committee. Today's meeting will also be streamed live on the Cairngorms YouTube channel. Before we go any further with the meeting, I'm going to ask the clerk to run a roll call.
Chris Beattie.
Good morning.
Jeeva Blackett.
I'm here.
Sandy Bremner.
Good morning.
Jackie Brereton.
Morning.
Peter Cosgrove.
Good morning.
Kenny Deans. Paul Gibb.
Here.
Russell Jones.
Morning.
John Kirk.
Morning.
Laura McCallum. Morning. Eleanor McIntosh. Here. Fiona McLean.
Morning.
Duncan Miller.
Morning.
Anne Ross.
Good morning.
Derek Ross.
Here.
And we've had apologies from Hannah Grist, Bill Lobban, Steve Micklewright and Michael Williamson.
Thank you very much. Members, to help move the business forward effectively, please keep your questions succinct and to the point and focus firmly on clarification of technical or planning issues. Once we've moved into the discussion phase of an application, it would be helpful if members could indicate at an appropriate point if you're minded to put forward any proposal regarding the officer's recommendations. Please raise your hands to indicate that you wish to speak. During the meeting, please make sure that your microphones are muted unless you're speaking to ensure premium sound quality on live stream. I think that's really just for online people. Should a member wish to pull together an amendment to the motion of any of the items today, a breakout room is available and the details are on your board memo. And you will be joined there by Peter Ferguson, our legal advisor from Harper McLeod, who's in attendance. Okay, so we'll move on to item number 2, minutes of the previous meeting from the 14th of March 2025 and matters arising not covered elsewhere. Can I ask if the committee is content with the accuracy of the minutes of the meeting? Agreed? Okay. And is happy to approve these minutes? Yep. Okay, that's grand. So move further on now. I will move a motion to take the draft minutes from our confidential session on the 14th of March at the end of this public session. Are we happy with that? Yes. Okay, so we have agreement there. So item 3, matters arising, action points, updates have been none, and there are no matters arising from the previous meeting. So we will move on to item number 4, declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare an interest on any of the items on the agenda today? And if you do have an interest, can you please be clear on the item number, the nature of the declaration, and whether you still wish to take part in the item or leave? Do any members have a declaration? I'm not seeing any in the room. Nope. Okay. We shall move forward then. So we'll move on to item number 5. This is the application for detailed plan permission 2023/0406/DET, the erection of a warehouse building, Class 6, formation of an access track, parking area and associated works at land 130 metres southeast of the House of Brewer, Pittigowan, Blair Athol, Pitlochry. And this is going to be introduced by Katie Crerar, our planning officer from Development Management, and the officer's recommendation is for refusal of the application. We have 2 speakers today. We have Mr. Patrick Birkbeck, the Managing Director of the House of Brewer, and Agent Mark Richardson from Ristall Consulting Limited. So we'll start off with a presentation from Katie.
Thank you. Can you hear me all okay? Yeah? Okay, great. As the convener has said, this application is for the erection of a warehouse building, access track, parking area and associated works at land southeast of the House of Brewer. So this is the development site outlined in red. It lies approximately 350 metres to the east of the main House of Brewer complex, which you can see there on the left of the map. The site itself lies between the Brewer Water, which runs along the north of the site, which you can see marked on the map there, the River Garry, which runs along the southeast side of the site, and then it has the A9 to the southwest boundary of the side of the site. The site is primarily low-lying grassland, and it's currently accessed via a track to the north of the red line boundary, which you can see marked in white. Just to the just adjacent to the proposed access route. So here it is. Here's the aerial view of the site. Again, you can see the main House of Brewer complex. And I think this more clearly shows, you can see the access to the site that is being proposed, which will be taken from the existing road into the car park, and that existing junction connects directly with B8079, which again you can see there. So it is an existing established access that already accommodates large numbers of vehicles. So the proposed access, the first part of the access will remain as currently, and then a new access track will be created down to the site, and will connect closer to the main site with the existing access track. At this point, I just want to raise some comments that have been sent to us from Blair Athol and Struan Community Council. We received them just a couple of days ago, which, whilst they can't be considered formally or reported in the same way, I'm just raising them here, and also they are to do with access. So it's just while I'm discussing that. So they don't object to the proposal. However, there is some concern regarding historical access rights to the river and to the fields south of the House of Brewer in Pittogowan via the A9 underpass next to the River Garry. So whilst the applicant may be able to provide some clarity on this, there's nothing that I can see in the plans that would suggest that access to this would be impeded. Unfortunately, I don't know if I can point and show you. Oh, I can. Yes, so I understand that it's access that will come through here. But again, as I say, there's no suggestion that would be affected by the proposal. In addition, they also highlight that the access point to the development from the B8079 is close to the bridge over the Brewer Burn and directly opposite the start of the Falls of Brewer Walk. They believe this would create safety issues and that there should be additional signage. And just to clarify, I think that they maybe are misunderstanding that they believe that the existing access will be used as the main access. However, as we can see here, that it will actually be going in the existing access to the car park, and therefore hopefully that's not an issue. And they also raised, just for information, which is obviously useful for the committee to know, is that the speed limit here is due to be reduced from 40 down to 20, which I think you're aware of. So just raising that. Okay, oh, sorry. So this is the proposed layout of the site. Just to give you a little bit of context for the proposal, that the warehouse being proposed is part of a wider strategic investment plan to develop a fabric hall and marketplace at the House of Brewer. A separate planning application was approved by Perth and Kinross last August, I think, for a partial change of use of one of the existing warehouses on another part of the site to form retail space. So one of the key intentions of this proposal is to make up for some of that lost warehouse space, as well as providing additional space for food preparation, and as part of the A9 dualling resilience, to have more inventory on site. That just to give you a bit of background as the purpose of the warehouse itself. So this is the site layout here. You can see the rectangular warehouse building. It is approximately nearly 66.5 metres long by just over 20 metres wide. As shown in the previous slide, that there will be a new access coming from the existing junction, and it'll be tarmacked all the way down to the warehouse itself, and extending along the front elevation of the warehouse. 10 car parking spaces will be provided. There'll be space for 2 vans, and there'll be 2 tarmac vehicle accesses into the warehouse itself, which are shown on the map. There'll also be a couple of roof water swales just to the sort of west and to the south of the warehouse, as well as landscaping proposals around it. I'd just like to highlight here that you can see, or hopefully you can see on the plan, that the applicant has overlain SEPA's medium likelihood of flooding, of flood risk, plus climate change sort of boundary. Now this is, or extent, should I say, and this demonstrates that, or illustrates that that the warehouse proposal and the access has been located out with SEPA's flood risk plan. However, the flood risk assessment that has been provided with the detailed flood risk assessment that's been provided with the application demonstrates that actually the flood risk is more extensive than the SEPA's flood risk maps, and as such there is flood risk on the site, which I'll go into a little bit later. But as part of that, as a consequence of the flood risk on site, there's 2 mitigation measures that have been included as part of the design. So the first one here is an elevated an elevated pedestrian access egress route along the northern part of the site, the northern elevation of the building, and then down the western side, which connects with the main access and the car park to the north of the application site, to ensure that no island of development will be created as a result of that. And I'll cover the next mitigation measure on the next slide. Okay, so here's the elevations of the building. Again, rectangular in form with a pitched roof, a simple design that's evident in other parts of the House of Brewer complex. The ridge height of the building is 10.2 metres. The whole building will be finished in steel composite panels in a bottle green colour. There will be solar panels on the roof, solar panels and roof lights on the roof. On the front elevation of the building, there will be two vehicle accesses, which we can see marked there, shown there, which will have sort of roller shutter doors, as well as 4 pedestrian doors on the building, 1 on each elevation, as well as various windows, lights and vents. Again, all of these will be in the matching bottle green colour of the main building. In addition to this, the second flood mitigation measure that has been designed into the proposal is that the building will be elevated with a clear understory to allow water to flow unobstructed into the River Garry in the event of flooding on site. So you can see that just here on the northern elevation and on the southern elevation as well. There's a sort of gap under the building to allow sort of more free flow of the water. Okay, and this is just showing an example of existing buildings at the House of Brewer complex, and this proposal is very much in keeping with that. This is the layout of the warehouse. So again, just a large warehouse building with a lot of space for warehousing in the racking system. In the western end of the building, there will be a food preparation room along with food storage fridges and freezers, area for deliveries and access, as well as changing and toilet facilities for staff, as well as a small office. So just looking at the photos here, this is just for context. So this is the existing access, which you can see also connects to the B8079. This is not going to be the access that's used, but it was just for clarity in terms, because of the comments from the Community Council. I think they thought that this was the access to be used. So the picture on the left is the existing access there, which you can see the House of Brewer on the top. And on the right-hand side, this is closer to where the new access will then meet the existing access. And it'll be tarmac down to the site, which is just shown on the just in the distance there. So this is the proposed access via the existing junction. Again, it's the road will remain as is up to probably about where the motorhomes are, and then the new access will continue on from there through there. And this is beyond that. So this is where the proposed access route will go over to the site over here. So this is a view of the site from the southwest edge. You can see the existing access, and you can also see here, this is the Brewer Water, and then you've got the River Garry running down the other side of of the site. So this is a view of the site. You can also see this, the A9 there, which lies about 5 metres above the site. And that's just to give you another view of again, you can see the kind of difference in levels of the A9 and the site itself. And that's an existing turning circle. The site itself comes to just sort of the edge of that. And this would be, I think this is the access route that was being referred to by the Community Council. So this is where the warehouse would be situated. And this is from the site and where the warehouse would be situated, looking back towards, you can see the A9, and then you can see where the access track would come in. Okay, so in terms of the principle, it's recognised that the House of Brewer makes a significant contribution to the local area and the economy, and this proposal would support the ongoing operation and expansion of the business. It's in keeping with the wider functions of the existing business and is acceptable as a principle which largely complies with National Planning Framework for Policy 29 Rural Development and the relevant settlement objectives for Brewer and Pittogowan. In terms of ecology, whilst there are potential effects on the neighbouring watercourses, these can be appropriately managed through a construction management plan with a pollution prevention plan, which is something that we could condition. The application also includes provisions for mitigating and enhancing biodiversity, and these can also be secured via a planning condition to ensure biodiversity enhancement. Both of these measures would be compliant with NPF, or National Planning Framework for Policies 3 for biodiversity and 4 natural places, as well as Local Development Plan Policy for natural heritage. However, whilst the proposal has given weight to future climate events in respect to flooding, the proposal itself is at risk of flooding and therefore not cited and designed to adapt to future risks from climate change, and would not comply with NPF 4 policies 1 and 2, which in respect of tackling the climate and nature crises and climate mitigation and adaptation. In terms of landscape and design, the site is located within a part of the Cairngorms National Park, which attracts a large numbers of visitors to a relatively concentrated area, and is close to the House of Brewer, which also comprises a series of large-scale buildings and car parking and people. The ground level of the site lies below those of the surrounding landscape, which provides some enclosure. And whilst there would be an effect on the special landscape quality, as well as some visibility from the A9, particularly from the west, and for cars travelling southbound, these could largely be mitigated by appropriate tree and scrub planting, which again could be conditioned and through a landscaping plan. So overall, the proposal complies with the relevant policies in respect of design and landscaping. As for access, as the access will be created via an existing junction onto the B8079, which already serves a busy car park, there are no issues in respect of the access or parking provision. Perth and Kinross have requested a condition for the provision of cycle parking, and Transport Scotland have requested 3 conditions in respect of the design and construction of the access road to ensure it's compatible with the proposed accommodation track for the A9 dualling scheme. Sorry. So, as you will be aware from the committee report, flood risk is a key issue on the site, and SEPA and Perth and Kinross have both objected to the proposal due to flood risk. So I'm just going to take you through another couple of slides to go through that. So, so this is a map of SEPA's future flood risk extent. SEPA themselves acknowledge that whilst their flood maps don't show flooding on the site, they are based on strategic scale modelling, so they don't accurately represent flood risk at the more local scale. So as you can see, the site there, does not currently lie within the SEPA's future flood risk extents. However, just looking at the site plan again, and I've just boldened that the SEPA's 1 in 200 year plus climate change flood extent. Again, you can see that the warehouse has been positioned out with that that extent. However, the detailed flood risk assessment, which was undertaken for the site and in compliance with good practice guidance, shows that the extent of flooding is greater than SEPA's flood extent maps, and therefore it's demonstrated that the site is at risk of flooding, and therefore National Planning Framework 4 Policy 22 applies. Part A of the policy states that development proposals at risk of flooding or in a flood risk area will only be supported if they are for essential infrastructure where the location is required for operational reasons. So essential infrastructure includes things like digital and telecommunications infrastructure, renewable energy facilities, water and wastewater systems, transport networks identified in the local development plan. The next criteria is for where proposals for water compatible uses, or it's for the redevelopment of an existing building or site of an equal or less vulnerable use, or finally the redevelopment of previously used sites in built-up areas where the local development plan identified a need to bring these into positive use and where proposals demonstrate that long-term safety and resilience can be secured in accordance with relevant SEPA advice. It's not considered that the proposal meets any of these exception criteria. Whilst the mitigation measures have been proposed and could create a more resilient proposal, SEPA and Perth and Kinross Council's flooding team have maintained their objection on the basis that mitigation measures will only be acceptable where proposals meet criteria 4 of Policy 22A, which in this case it does not. So whilst generally the other planning considerations in this proposal have been satisfactorily addressed or could be conditioned, the flood risk assessment clearly shows that most of the proposed warehouse would be within the flood risk area, and as it doesn't come under any of the exception criteria set out in NPF 4 Policy 22A, mitigation measures cannot be accepted. The intent of the Policy 22 is to promote avoidance as a first principle, and therefore it's recommended that the proposal should be refused as it does not comply with the relevant provisions of NPF 4 Policy 22 and Local Development Plan Policy 10. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Members, do we have any questions for Katie? So we've got Eleanor, Paul, anyone else? John? Oh, Duncan. Sorry.
Katie, you said when we were looking at the plans of the warehouse that there'd been provision for water to flow under the warehouse building. But then later on, when you were going through the design and landscape part, you said that the buildings hadn't been designed to adapt to climate change. And I just wondered, are you saying there's more that could be done to make them more acceptable?
I think it's NPF policies 1, and I think it's 1 and 2. I think what they're referring is that that in terms of climate change, showing that a proposal has been designed with climate change in, taking it into account. But I think in this instance, what we're saying is that by the fact that the location of the warehouse is on a flood risk, it is at risk of flooding. Therefore, it's actually not taking into account impacts of climate change because it's being located somewhere where there is a risk of flooding. So even absolutely taking into account that they've provided mitigation measures, the very fact that the warehouse is being positioned somewhere where it's going to be at risk from climate change is the reason that we're saying that it doesn't comply with those policies. Does that make sense?
Okay, I take what you're saying there. I also acknowledge that it does not meet NPF 422 policy, but it also ticks the boxes of a lot of other policies. If this committee were minded to do something different to the recommendation, am I right in thinking that it would still go to ministers for decision?
Yes, it would.
Okay, thank you, Eleanor. Paul.
Yep, thank you. Maybe on a similar theme. On this map here, what is the water depth in that purple area where the building is going to be located?
So yeah, I don't know the exact figure of that. I think the flood risk assessment from didn't have exact figures for the different colours. There's not a key for that,
Okay.
but maybe something the applicants can address when they speak.
Okay, so as a prelude to that, the freeboard, the base of the building is at 148 metres. So understanding where that water level was would be helpful.
Yeah. Apologies, I don't have an answer to that.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, apologies, I can't answer that. I'm not a flood expert, obviously, but I can't tell you exactly. But obviously, the mitigations have been carefully informed by obviously the flood risk assessment. So I'm assuming that the levels that it's been raised would presumably be able to accommodate the flood risk event that would be there.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Duncan. Oh, that was your question. Yeah, okay. Well, I've got a little question, if no one else does. We're all familiar with the climate change allowance that's been applied to, the 1 in 200 years plus climate change. Yeah. Now, I mean, I think a lot of us are familiar with a percentage of about 35%, but in this case, it's 53%. Could you maybe take us through that, please?
Yeah, so basically the percentage is based on, it varies from area to area, and it depends on the size of the river's catchment. So 53% does seem high, and it is, I think, high in comparison to a lot of the other areas. But that is the requirement for this location. I think it's the Tay area, and taking into account the size of the catchment as well. So. Yeah, all of this. There is actually a map on SEPA's website, if anyone was interested, that you can actually see the variations between the climate change figures, how it varies between areas. But that's the figure we've been given by SEPA, and that's their requirement.
Okay, thank you, Katie. Any more questions? We've got Russell, followed by Peter.
Yeah, thanks. Katie, you definitely said that the area where this warehouse is going to go is not on SEPA's own flood risk maps, but it did appear on this flood risk assessment.
Yes, so SEPA themselves acknowledge that it is not within flood risk identified by their maps, but again, their mapping is at a much more strategic level, and therefore the purpose of doing a flood risk assessment is to get a more accurate picture of the flood risk on the site. And in this instance, having done that, the flood risk assessment has actually shown that the flooding is actually greater than SEPA's flood risk extent.
Thank you. Peter.
It was a question about the mitigation hierarchy and what alternatives had been considered. Generally in NPF4 you put forward alternatives, and if you can't come up with an alternative like location, then you kind of go, well, we can't avoid impacts and effects. The next level down would be minimising and reduction. Has the applicant provided alternative suggestions and demonstrated they can't meet their needs elsewhere?
My understanding from the applicant is that this is one of the last, or probably the last place that they potentially could put this. So we haven't gone down that route. Again, I think we've assessed it very much on the proposal that's come before us, and obviously got our feedback from SEPA, and they have quite a strong, clear view on this proposal, that given the risk of flooding, it would not be acceptable in flood risk terms.
Okay, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Katie. Any other questions? Nope, no other questions. Right, thank you, Katie. What we'll do now is we will have a presentation from Mr. Birkbeck and Mr. Richardson.
I'll look to you for some help. ladies and gentlemen.
Well, have a seat first and then
No, seat.
remember to put your microphone on. You have 10 minutes in total.
Hoping the clock hasn't started yet. Firstly, thank you very much for giving us this opportunity to come and explain what we're trying to do. I'm Patrick Birbeck. I'm the Managing Director of the House of Brewer. It's a family business. It was set up 30 years ago by my mother and father. And I'm not going to speak for very long. I'm not going to try and argue about SEPA or planning authorities or anything like that. I'm going to leave that to Mark. And I'm going to apologise in advance if I'm a bit passionate about it, if I come across as sort of emotional, but this is really important to us. It's our business. My life's work is in that business, and now that I'm over 50, I feel as though that actually means something, my life's work. We employ 350 people. Some of those people, some of those families have been with us for 30 years, and it's important. We're faced at the moment with ever-increasing costs. We've got a situation where the increase in the living wage, the national insurance, is going to cost me £1 million this year extra. And I've got two choices to make on that front. One choice is you reduce your overhead, you reduce your headcount, you consolidate the business. Well, the second one is you try and sell more. You try and increase your turnover. And the purpose of why we're here today is trying to create some more retail space at Brewer. Any space at Brewer is far too valuable for us to be using it for storage, which is why we did the planning application for the change of use a couple of years ago, which we were successful in gaining. And we have actually started some of the work, which you saw in one of the photographs, in creating part of this area, moving it into retail. We've moved all of our textiles already, has moved down to Ballinluig, which is our distribution centre. That's where we run our direct shopping from. The direct shopping is part of the business that's growing rapidly. It would make a lot of commercial sense to be investing in the direct shopping, the internet, the online catalogues, and not investing in retail. Retail is a rubbish world to be in. It's really very difficult. But we believe in retail. We believe in theatre. We believe in the experience. We believe in what we do at Brewer. 30 years ago, my mother and father took a hell of a risk. Everyone said it'd be a disaster. But I would like to think that we've proved them wrong. I'd like to think that we draw a lot of people into the area. We've got about 2 million visitors come every year. And we want to keep investing. In our direct shopping, the labour costs are meaning that we're investing in automation. That could save us sort of 8 to 10 people from one bagging machine. We're not doing that at retail. We've actually taken on more people this spring because we want to increase the service and give a better service. And we want to look after our customers. We want to sell to them. The idea of the new retail space, which would start off at 10,000 square feet, as one of the warehouses that we're trying to empty, is that we would create this cloth hall, soft furnishings, an emporium, a mecca, a place that people would come to Scotland to come and see. It'll be based on Scottish fibres. It'll be based on natural fibre. The Scottish textile industry is on its knees. But why can't we still shout about it? Why can't we still be proud about it? Why can't we really push it? And that's what we want to do. 30 years ago, a food hall at Brewer, it was really one of the first food halls. There were delis, there were, shortbreads in woolen mills, there were local, you had your local butcher and whatever, but there wasn't a food hall. Now they're all around the place. We've got to stay ahead. We've got to innovate. And the cloth hall, we feel, is a way of doing it. We can't do that unless we can empty the warehouse. We can't move our food storage, our breakables, all down to Ballinluig because of the logistics. We can't move it to Perth, where we'd find people more easily, where we'd reduce our labour costs. We don't want to do it. We've got to have it at Brewer. The food prep area is key for us, because our restaurant at the moment cooks the majority of what we serve. The butchery butchers all our meat, but we don't make our own cakes. So you come to Brewer, you don't get a homemade cake. It's ridiculous, but we haven't got the space. So look, I'm going to go to Mark so that I haven't taken up too much time. And like I say, I apologise about being passionate, but this is really important to us.
Thanks, Patrick, and thank you very much, committee, for the chance to present. And
Mark, can you switch your mic on? That's it.
Thank you, committee. Really appreciate the chance to present. My name is Mark Richardson. I'm a planning consultant. I've worked with Patrick and the family for close on 20 years on various projects. Here to answer any questions at the end, too, particularly around flood risk. I'm conscious on time, Chris, we'll keep within it. I mean, Katie and your team, you've been great. I know that's not where we wanted to end up, so thank you for your help and your really good presentation. That's the context. The one point I just wanted to flag is that it might look slightly from some of the photos that it's a removed site. The important point is that the whole of the land to the west is where our car park is. It's got permission. We're building it out in phases, and that is the closest site to Brewer. It's effectively the only site left for us to put this replacement warehouse so that we can deliver the market hall. So you see the remaining phases and the access running through. The pedestrian access is unaffected throughout, and happy to answer any questions in connection with the points raised. That's the plan that Katie showed, which is where the building sits. You've heard about the background as to what it's about and its size. It's also just important to note we've got our solar panels. We have an ecological approach to drainage. It will be built through it if it were approved through a construction management plan. And we're very, very keen, and we've engaged constantly throughout the business with your policy team around ensuring that we deliver on the ambitions of the LDP. As you heard, I mean, there are no objections from the public or the Community Council. Thank you for those comments. And just to confirm, that footpath is unaffected. The bottom bit actually has been vested to Transport Scotland for the dualling, but once again, that pedestrian right is retained. And the objection we have is a shared one from SEPA and PKC on the principle of flood risk. Important to point from the very beginning, which is why we chose the site, that the site is located out of SEPA's flood risk zone. And actually, as importantly, it sits within SEPA's least vulnerable category. We're not talking housing here. This is the plan of SEPA's map that Katie helpfully showed at the bottom, and that shows the site set within it. But we get it. It's close to the River Garry and Brewer Water. And it's for that reason that we've undertaken extensive modelling. I mean, it's taken us a year. We've got a catchment-wide survey. So, I mean, we've been up on the Brewer section, all the way up north of Brewer Lodge. On the River Garry, we've been right up to down the Spiddle. We've modelled the lot. And what it's shown us is that in a 1 in 200 plus climate change, and SEPA, and if there's a slight frustration, it's because, we get on well with them, but they haven't engaged in this process at all, because if they had, I think we feel that we'd been able to resolve their concern. They've applied a 53%, which, in old money is equivalent to a 1 in a 1,000-year storm event. That's what we're talking about. And in that scenario, parts of the site will flood by a maximum of 10 centimetres. Now, we don't belittle that. At the end of the day, it's our colleagues, it's our inventory stock, it's our reputation. And we've therefore adopted, a precautionary approach. We've applied the SEPA principles of achieving this freeboard, so the buildings will sit above the flood risk zone. We will have a 300 millimetres, 30 centimetre freeboard, and then the building above. That's all in line with SEPA's technical guidance on elevated buildings. But notwithstanding that, we've provided an emergency access for staff, and it's only staff that would use this site, and we would sign up to SEPA's monitoring system. All that's about is ensuring that this proposed development is completely aligned with policy. That's the details. Councillor Gibbon, happy to answer any queries as to how it works, but in short, ground level, flood level, 300, then the building. It's actually just under a metre between ground level and building. And that gives us the reassurance. I should say this has been peer reviewed. It's not just us saying this. It's too important investment. It's too important for the park. It's too important to make this happen. So we've had it peer reviewed. They confirmed that. And actually Jacobs peer reviewed it as well as part of the A9 dualling. It's important to stress that SEPA have not challenged the actual assessment. They haven't challenged the design, nor have they questioned the performance of what we're suggesting. Their concern is that they take the view that it's contrary to NPF4. Critical, actually, for us is there is no risk to people or downstream properties. And I can say with assurance that the proposed development will not flood. And for us, we take the view that that's aligned with Policy 24, which is precisely worded. It's about the development proposal at risk of flooding. Well, our view is the development proposal is not at risk of flooding. That's important for us to actually deliver on Patrick's ambition for Brewer. We feel it kind of reflects on some of your other decisions that have been made. And effective, I suppose the question here is, what level of risk should reasonably be assigned to the application? Our view is that we have a very deep...
You have 1 minute, Mark.
a very detailed understanding of that risk. We've planned for it, we've mitigated, it's the only site. If there was another site, we'd bring it forward. You know, we are not at the business of looking for problems. We don't want to cause you hassle. We've got enough in retail. This is the only site that we have that can come forward. Therefore, we've designed it to ensure that it won't risk. And ultimately, it gives us a replacement building that's aligned with your LDP strategy. And for us, it's all about trying to invest in the park and continue to support that ambition. So thank you very much. Sorry it's slightly rushed. And we're here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Bang on time. Do we have any questions from members for Mark or Mr. Birkbeck? Sandy, Eleanor, anyone else? Nope. Okay.
A first question on the key issue policy 22, and just referred to mitigation being peer reviewed by Jacobs. If you could explain who Jacobs are, what the significance of that organisation is, and a question for Patrick. In your opening remarks, you referred to the business implications of a rejection. If I can ask you to clarify that, please. Are you claiming a significant loss of jobs ultimately if this application is rejected? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, happy to answer it. So in terms of the peer review, that was externally peer reviewed in order to make sure that the catchment area and the analysis and mitigation was valid, and we submitted that. In parallel, and completely unrelated for us, is that Jacobs, which is a much more professional outfit than me, Patrick, in terms of professional firm, big global firm, they have done the flood risk assessment for the A9 dueling, and unknown to us is they had run a model, and that confirmed the exact same figure, that we're talking, you know, parts of the site up to 10 mil in a one in effectively 1,000-year event. So this is a very extreme, and I suppose the relevance of that is not in any way to be casual about flood risk, but I suppose it's to identify kind of proportionality and what we're talking about in terms of an event. And therefore, I suppose we take the view that it is a low level of risk and therefore falls out with that MPF clarification. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you. Eleanor. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
So with regards employment, numbers of people, the impact that it would have on the business, would we reduce the number of people a little bit, but I'd be reluctant to turn around and say that the rejection here would we would lose a lot of jobs based at Brewer. We'll come on to that bit. But what it will mean is we won't employ more people. So that's a big thing for us. And what it would also mean is that we would have to shift investment out of the retail and out of the Brewer site down to the Ballinluig site. And that will cost people, because we have been we were doing quite a lot of research in the last few months about how we automate the business, because we're driven that way because of our labour costs. So would there be a sacrifice of labour because of a rejection? Yes. Would it happen at Brewer on the site? Not really. We just wouldn't take any more people on. I think there'd be a natural people are resigning. We wouldn't refill. But we would lose employment down at Ballinluig because we'd be forced down that route.
Thank you both.
Thank you. Eleanor.
Yeah, just to clarify that the concerns raised by the community that Katie referred to in her presentation, that I think I'm picking up that the access is not affected at all. Could I just get clarity on that?
Of course, Councillor, I'm passing Patrick, who sits on or attends all the community council meetings. We've got a relationship with them, and it's very helpful for us. Just before I pass on to Patrick, sorry, Patrick, just to confirm that the track that you saw in the photographs, actually, that's the footpath track, not the access. So we don't touch that. That's the footpath, and it runs all the way down and under the Garry. That will be completely unaffected. The access itself, as Katie rightly points out, runs through the existing car park and future planned car park. So there'll be no impact at all on that. And once again, through our attendance at community council meetings and our discussions with our local councillors, points such as how we can sign it, how we can maintain it, all get covered, and so there will be no impact. Thank you.
If I could probably just add to that I think it'll have been Giles Stevens that wrote on behalf of the community council, and Giles took the stance to give me a ring on Wednesday to say that he said, do you know you're going to the national park on Friday? Yeah, Giles, I've got an idea that I'm going up there. And he said, well, look, we've written about it. We're in support of it. And I think what's important for you to know, and I assume you know, is that the First Minister had just written to say that the speed limit, as Katie said, the speed limit is going to change from 40 to 20, just where the access is. I didn't know. The First Minister hadn't told me that we were doing that. But so I'm thrilled, I'm really pleased with that. And that's been something that we've been working with the Community Council on.
Okay, thank you. Anne.
Thank you. Good morning. I was wondering if you can tell me how much you've invested on the retail site over the years, please.
I think I get this one, do I? Yeah. £25 million.
Okay. Any further questions?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Paul. Yeah.
Yeah, just asking for some clarity then on the diagram you showed, the cross section which had the base of the building. It was 148.2 meters. Yeah, so in the additional study that was done, and I was referring to the purple area in the map, do you know what the height of the water is there? Is that the 147.7 level that you've got marked there?
Yes, Councillor. I mean, that is, I mean, obviously the site itself is slightly above the watercourse, but the ground level is 147.3. What's come out of this? I mean, this is a catchment wide. I mean, in a way, it's extraordinary, and that's, Patrick was about the passion of it. I mean, we really need this warehouse to unlock this investment, and that's why, thankfully, we've spent a huge amount of time and money in trying to understand the catchment, and we, which is huge. And then SEPA have applied for reasons that I don't know, but we just gone with it. It's 53%, so that's a 1 in 1,000 year, But what we've established is that actually, there is no, we're talking about extreme situations. So at the moment, I mean, the site does not flood. So 147 is the ground level. What's come out of that modelling is that very extreme, so 1 in 1,000 year kind of event, we're talking, 100 mil. And so we've then, which is the 147.4. We've then applied the freeboard of 300 to get us to 147.7. And this is this elevated building, and that follows SEPA's technical guidance for elevated buildings in areas that they deem to be of flood risk. So that's entirely compliant, as you would expect us to do. I mean, that's what we're there to do. So it sits on these stilts. It's a very expensive build project. We've had to align it with the landscape teams to ensure that they're comfortable with the design, which they are. So we have what's known as this freeboard, which essentially the water runs under it. Then we've got our subfloor. For us, it's about energy efficiency, so it's a big subfloor. So effectively, when it comes to it, you're just under a metre between ground level and finished floor level. That's important because all these flows, effectively, it's 3 times headboard, can run under it. And then we still have these additional mitigation measures of pedestrian access and a flood warning. And that is intended to genuinely try and introduce a robust and precautionary approach to managing surface water. And we're talking 10 centimetres. I hope that helps. Thank you.
And no one is contesting these figures when you've had your discussions subsequently with SEPA, that this is accepted?
Yes, Councillor. SEPA have raised no objections to the details of this. There's been nothing. I mean, their issue has been one of principle, but they've had all the information. We also did a supplemental drainage impact assessment to demonstrate they've had all the info. And the point is one of, in their view, and it's not been critical of me, just as their interpretation of policy, they say it's just simply contrary to policy. There's been no challenge at all. But I think we can, in this instance, stand with the reports, because we know that they comply with SEPA's design standards and they've been peer reviewed. So that is a compliant technical solution once you move away from the principle.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Lauren.
Yeah, thank you both. Really lots of work that's gone into this. I think my question is just maybe giving the committee a bit of confidence in terms of, we have that, the worst case scenario happens and it does flood. What plans are there in place? Because one thing that does spring to mind, that in the back of my mind, maybe particularly not a planning issue, is insurance, because I know other properties around it can be affected. So yeah, I guess my question is, can you give the reassurance that there is a plan if it does, that 1 in 1,000 year event does happen?
Thank you, Councillor. I mean, I hope we're all here in a 1 in 1,000 year event and to see it. But yes, we can, and that's not said just because we're so keen to see this happen. It's because we've done the work. We've got a 3 times headroom. So in that extreme situation, we're talking 10 centimetres. We've provided for 30 centimetres plus the boarding. So there's 3 times over that 1 in 1,000 year event. So it rightly so has been over-specified to do that. Downstream, there are no properties within that catchment that would be adversely affected. So what we're talking about are our staff and colleagues in the building themselves. It's important to us there is no public access. This is purely for staff. We have this identical situation at our warehouses at Ballinluig, where we've put in place the same, and it's worked scenario. Now, admittedly, they've not been there for 1,000 years yet, Patrick, but one day. But there we have the same. We've elevated them. We have a safe route, and we are locked in with the SEPA flood risk protocols. And we've had some pretty serious storm events. It's never flooded. So I think we feel confident to tell you as councillors and also as a business and an employer and a high-profile brand that of all the risks we face in the business at the moment, how we're managing them, we feel that this situation mitigates that to an acceptable level. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Derek Ross.
Just to let the applicants know, we're not councillors.
I'm sorry, sir. I'm so
some of us are. Some of us are.
Some of us are. There you are. There. I was looking at the chair, the vice convener.
Right. Thank you very much. Any further questions for speakers? Nope. Okay, so we'll move into the discussion phase. Would anyone like to raise anything? John.
Having lived in a floodplain, I think it's quite smart how they've raised the building. And, as far as I can see, the water flows under it. And they've done a pretty good job of mitigating the risk of flood. And we're in an age where companies have to be green. I can see what Patrick's saying about moving down to Ballindalach and having to transport stuff back up and down the road. Quite honestly, I think we've been seeing SEPA and their flood risk before. And as I say, I do live in one myself. And I think it's quite a smart idea what they've done here.
Thank you, John. Fiona.
Yeah, I've got a question for our planners. Looking at this diagram that you have here, you mentioned that our planners were content with what you were proposing there, and I just wanted to get their view on what this proposal, taking into account the fact that because SEPA have put in an objection, they have to make a recommendation based on that. But looking at this in particular, I'd like to get an idea of how you feel about this, if you are content with it.
Well, I guess I can't really comment on the flooding side of things because I would be much more a flood risk expert would be able to do that. I mean, I think our position on this has been very much that this is we've had a firm SEPA objection from SEPA and Perth and Kinross on the basis that this doesn't comply with policy. They haven't provided any specific comments about this level of detail, which was provided to them, but their objection is primarily based on the fact that avoidance is the main principle and the main intent of Policy 22. And given that there is flood risk on the site, they're taking that view. And from our perspective, that we felt that we accept that, and I think in all other respects of the proposal, I think as mentioned, generally they can all satisfactorily be addressed in terms of because everything else is fairly minor things that could be conditioned. However, in terms of the flood risk, we feel that we've taken SEPA and Perth Kinross's position on this one.
Right, thank you. Eleanor.
Planning, don't you just love it? it's all coming down to me to not meeting policy 22. Well, if that was what planning was about, why are we sitting round the table? We're here as individuals to take a decision on what's in front of us. And weighing up the merits, I think this proposal brings such a lot of good things to the area, to the national park. It's well thought out. To my mind, they have addressed the climate change issue and the flooding issue. And I totally accept it doesn't meet NFP 422, but I think it ticks all the other policy boxes really well. And what I would like to see is, and I might be jumping the gun, I'm testing the committee on this one, I would like to see this being deferred at this point to allow Katie and your colleagues to come back with conditions that might, because we don't have any conditions on this at the minute. And I would like to see that being looked at more. I quite accept it would need to go to ministers, but I just think we should use a bit of individuality here and not just look at it not meeting policy, because that's why we're here. If it was just a case of it didn't meet policy, end of story, what is the need for a committee? That's where I am at the minute.
Thank you, Eleanor. Paul.
Thank you. I agree with Eleanor. I'd like to find a way to support the application. And I'm looking at policy 22, and while it doesn't meet the 4 criteria that it sets out, the policy goes on to state that if it can be demonstrated that the applicant has all the risks of flooding are understood and addressed, and there's no reduction in floodplain capacity or increased risk for others, or a need for future flood protection measures, and the development remains safe and operational during floods, it doesn't become an island and that individuals are stranded, and it's flood resilient and resilient materials are used in the construction, it does lend some support to perhaps either deviating from policy 22 or disagreeing with the decision. I would like to explore that further, certainly legally, if we can.
Thank you, Paul. Anne.
Thank you. Well, if Paul is going to move that we accept this application, I'm happy to support. MPF 4. Wow. I hear. I've heard that it doesn't meet criteria, but Paul's countered that as far as I'm concerned. I also would commend any individuals and business who are prepared to invest in businesses in this day and age. I form a business background, and I thoroughly commend the applicants for doing so. Avoidance was mentioned and I've just written down the word avoidance that was mentioned by our planner when she was talking. I think that mitigation has been taken. The fact they've addressed everything, as far as I'm concerned. They've met everything regarding the risk of flooding, and they've put mitigation in place. So I am happy to support this application, and I think it's a very brave application. And anybody who invests in business in this day and age has to be commended, encouraged, because there's an awful lot of businesses closing. This is a big employer. From a planning point of view, we've seen the steps that they have taken to mitigate, and I agree with Paul. So I would, if Paul is moving, I would be happy to second.
Thank you, Anne. Sorry, thank you, Anne. Derek. Okay, Fiona?
Just to say, I actually agree with Eleanor. I would like this to be deferred because I agree. I think it needs to come back to us with an assessment based on what the mitigation of the applicants, and we could reconsider it then. That's what I would like to see. I agree absolutely with her recommendation.
Thank you, Fiona. Russell and Jeeva.
No, could I just get some clarification on exactly what we're expecting our planners to recommend? I mean, the mitigations are there in front of us, are they not? So I would support what Paul's suggesting, and I would like to support that and suggest that we break, and if Paul and Anne are in moving that, then they speak with legal and get some advice on that. Sorry, I don't really understand what you mean about it be deferred, and then what do we expect our planners to come back with?
Eleanor, do you want to come in on that
my
point?
point about deferring it was, as it stands, we have no conditions set. We're not going to be able to, it's going to have to go to ministers for approval. If we go against the recommendation, they're going to want conditions. I would like this committee to see that conditions first. We have no conditions. If we approve this today, there are no conditions.
Jeeva.
I really want to support this application, but I do actually get where Eleanor's coming from on this, because if we don't approve it with conditions that we don't like might be put in by ministers, I think. So I'm tempted, I'm really in favour, because, rural jobs are hard to come by, and I think what the House of Brew have done here is great. But I do share Eleanor's concerns a bit here, so I would support her.
Okay, we've got Fiona and Derek.
I think the benefit of deferring it and having conditions is that if this does go to ministers, then we would have the benefit of having those conditions, and I think it would strengthen our case. If it went to ministers as is, we wouldn't have a strong case because we wouldn't have those conditions, and we wouldn't have demonstrated that we've actually taken into account those conditions in our decision. So I think it would strengthen our case, which is the reason why I agree with Eleanor on deferring. Thank you.
I don't know if the question. If we approve this, it won't go to ministers. Or what's going to ministers? Whatever. Well, okay.
Yes, Peter.
To explain the process, if members were to approve today, there are no conditions. So in effect, it would be an unconditional approval today. But because of the outstanding objection from SEPA, that triggers a mandatory notification to ministers. This is different than an appeal to ministers following a refusal. If there were to be a refusal today and the applicants decided to appeal, then it would be a matter for the ministers as part of the appeal process to look at conditions. Whereas what we're talking about now is different. If there was an approval today, that approval would be without conditions. It would be notified to the ministers. The ministers can either release the decision back to the planning authority, i.e. not call it in, or if they were to call it in, as part of the call-in process, the ministers could look at conditions. So one option of an approval today would lead to ministers adding conditions, but it would be the minister's conditions. I think what Eleanor is referring to is if the application isn't called in, it needs to be notified to the ministers. That's mandatory, but call-in isn't mandatory. So if the ministers don't call in, the decision comes back to the planning authority, but that would be without conditions. So yeah. I think Eleanor's suggestion was if the decision is deferred to allow the planning officers to recommend a suite of conditions, then if on reconsideration the members approved subject to conditions, that would be notified to ministers, and the ministers could either not call in or could call in.
Gavin, could you?
I think Dave was actually going to come in first, so I'll let Dave speak.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify and echo what Peter just said, I think given the kind of broad sense that I'm getting, I think the suggestion that we look at conditions. Katie talked about how the development could be considered compliant with lots of other elements of NPF4 subject to conditions. Probably be entirely sensible to give officers time to look at the wording of those conditions, present those back to committee, and then, if so minded, we can obviously then refer the application to ministers with the benefit of the conditions that we, you as a committee would want to impose on any planning approval. I think that would be an entirely appropriate way to handle that if members were minded to go down that route.
Okay, Paul.
So can I just ask, how long might that take, and when might we see the application again?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the general principle normally would be we bring it back to the next planning committee, and we're happy to do that. I think it probably doesn't. I mean, we could do that in conjunction with yourselves as convener and vice convener, but it may be more appropriate for members to see that in the round at the next committee.
Sandy.
Just briefly, given that there appears to be a consensus from the committee in support of principle of the application, a deferral for conditions would appear to be the most likely way to achieve that outcome. So again, I would support Eleanor's approach.
Peter.
It's just a technical question. When you're coming up with conditions, will you be discussing those with the applicant to make sure that they are physically possible, or they fit in with what they're doing, or do you do this independent of them?
I mean, in general terms, we'll usually have some kind of, at least give applicants a heads up on conditions that we generally would recommend, when we're bringing applications to committee anyway. No problem with doing that. I mean, as officers, we will look to take proportionate approaches to conditions and, not impose unnecessary conditions. So happy to give the applicants, an initial look over conditions that are recommended, if that's what members want us to do.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I missed Lauren earlier on. Lauren?
Oh, no, it's okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. I don't know if I'm being thick, but are we, which is, there is a risk. Can we not accept with conditions, or do the team need to go away and come up with them? That's basically what yeah, so we can't approve with conditions. The team have to go away, work on those conditions, and it come back to committee. Right, got it. Cool. Just want to make sure that was exactly what we were voting for too. Thanks.
Thank you. Anne?
If we go down that route, I would be happy for it to go back to the convener and the vice convener for decision, rather than come back to committee to, I'm going to be quite honest, speed it up for the applicants.
Okay, thank you, Anne. Russell, got you coming in.
Can I just ask, on a very broad basis, roughly, what sort of conditions are we looking for? Broadly, I'm not putting you in the spot that obviously you're not wanting to come up with them today. At Highland Council planning, I know it's a different planning committee, but we would probably break and have a meeting with planners just now and discuss it, and then there would be a proposal put back. So if we're not doing that, can I just ask broadly, what sort of conditions would you be thinking of putting into this?
So as outlined, we have a couple of conditions from 3 conditions from Transport Scotland that are quite specific, that they've asked for for specific wording to be included. So that's to do with the construction of the access. Perth Kinross have also requested for inclusion of a condition for cycle parking. We will have a condition relating to sort of biodiversity enhancement. There will also we'll be asking for a landscaping plan just to confirm the planting around the warehouse as well as a construction environmental management plan with a pollution prevention plan, and that's associated with the to do with the proposal being obviously quite close to those waterways, and to ensure that there's no adverse effects on those. So those are the sort of key ones off the top of my head at the moment, and I don't know if there may be, we would all review them and have a look and see if there's any more, but those are kind of the key ones that we would, fairly standard things that we would include.
Katie, would there be any flood related conditions?
Yes.
Yes, there will be.
Yeah. Just make sure. Okay, I've got Jackie.
Thank you. Just really on the back of the consensus, as you say, convener, that we have as a committee, and we've obviously got a process to go through, but to adopt a principle of the speediest way to expedite this as possible, because the biggest frustration in the whole planning process for businesses, as you know, is the speed at which they go. And this is an important one for our local economy and for jobs and for the supply chain, etc., as I think everybody around the table has agreed. So I think I would back up Anne's suggestion that if the conditions are made, if it's acceptable to have those circulated without having to actually go to a meeting and they're agreed by the convener and vice convener of the planning committee, I would back that as well.
Okay, thank you, Jackie. I've got Paul and then Eleanor.
Katie, my question is perhaps the same as Russell. So what do you think, what can you give us guidance on that you'd be bringing back to us in terms of flood-related mitigation, which would be a condition? And why couldn't we debate that now and add it?
I might let Gavin answer that.
Could I come back at this point? I think it's fairly clear that the majority of members support the principle of this application. And you can see from the report and from Katie's presentation that officers are pretty satisfied with everything other than that specific flooding in principle point. I think that if members want to approve this, I think partly to help the applicant as well, the best thing to do is to make a decision in light of a full suite of conditions, so that you make a decision in light of all the information, and then that's the decision that's referred to ministers, and then ministers will go through their process. So I think that today it would be possible to make a deferral if members want to, if there's a motion to defer, but with the principle of accepting this application and approving it, subject to conditions from officers covering all the other matters. I think if any other trying to sort out the conditions either at the meeting or with other members is a subpar decision both for the committee and potentially for the applicant later on when it goes to ministers. So I think it's better to follow the procedure as clearly as possible and give the applicant a decision and refer that to ministers in a strong position.
Okay, thank you, Gavin. So we have a motion in front of us, which from the standing orders, that's to refuse the applicant. Just to keep things straight, do we have an amendment to defer? Yeah, Eleanor, that's your amendment. And do you have a second, Fiona? Judging by the sense in the room, I think that's the route that we want to go down. Our committee happy with that decision? Agreed? Oh, so Russell, yeah.
So is it possible procedurally for us to, if there was an agreement, for us to approve this subject to conditions put in place by planners and then just let it go at that?
It is an option for the committee, but it's not your normal practice. So I would rather that we gave you that information so that you were taking that decision in light of the conditions that were being imposed on the application if it's approved, because they do cover other matters which are critical to the application, bearing in mind that conditions relating to flooding, whether or not SEPA or the Council's flood team respond to our request for consultation on those, we will ask for their advice on those conditions as well.
Thank you, Eleanor.
I'm all for speed, but I also feel strongly that the applications that we approve should be the good applications, correct applications that we as a committee have looked at, and I really don't think it's asking too much, for it to come back to the next committee in June with a full set of conditions that we can thoroughly look at and know that we're happy with them. Because I think what we want is good applications. Also, I totally support this one. I want to see the conditions that are going to be attached. So I stand by the amendment.
Okay, Anne.
I respect what Eleanor has just said. I think this is a very good application. I think it's a robust application. I hear what we're saying about conditions, but I think we've also got to think about it from yes, we've got to think about it from the Cairngorms point of view, but you've also got to think about it from a business point of view as well, and the cost to the business. And to be quite honest, the planners have said they'll work with the business, but we've also heard now that it's got to go to the council for the council's flood team for comment, and I think, did you say SEPA for comment? This is all going to take longer and longer and longer, which is at an additional cost to the business. And therefore has an impact on jobs and etc. So I would ask that if it comes back with conditions, if we go down that route, that the application comes before the convener and the planning convener and the planning vice convener for decision.
Gila.
Yeah, can I just, sorry, I'm being thick here. Must be a day at this end of the table. Can I just have confirmation that if we don't put conditions on, that the Scottish Government could, and I don't want to be rude to the Scottish Government, but they are one step removed from those of us that live and work in the park, and that we are more likely to get workable conditions for the applicant than if it goes to Scottish ministers without conditions, because we stand a chance of them saying, this is fine, we're happy with this, we're not going to call it in. Am I right?
So if there was a motion to approve today without conditions, because there is an objection from SEPA, the statutory consultee, it wouldn't be competent to issue permission immediately following today's decision. There's a requirement to notify the application to ministers. Ministers have a choice at that stage. They can either release the application back to the planning committee or back to the park authority. That would be problematic. Normally, that's a good outcome for the planning authority. They have decided something in principle. Ministers haven't second-guessed that and have released it back to the planning authority. But in these rather unique circumstances, that would be a problem for the park authority because no conditions would be attached to the permission. Alternatively, the absence of conditions may trigger the ministers calling in the decision. Or if the ministers call in the decision for other reasons, they would have to come up with conditions. And the starting point for conditions wouldn't be the park authority's conditions, it would be the minister's conditions.
Okay, so where we're at just now, we've got the motion. We've got an amendment from Eleanor, seconded by Fiona, to defer the application to come back with a full set of conditions for discussion by the whole committee. Is there another amendment saying something different? Anne, you're leading that charge.
I need to break out, yes, but I need to break out just one amendment, please.
Okay, well, in that case then, can we have... Oh, yeah, I need a seconder, sorry. Yeah, do we have a seconder for Anne? Yeah, Paul?
Yeah, I think I'll second that because I'd like to explore it. But so from the debate, I understand that the risk is that if we approve this without conditions, there is the possibility that the Scottish Government will add something that would be undesirable. And if we follow Eleanor's route, if we go down that route, then we are making a more robust application that goes before the Scottish Government. Still got to go before them, and it might be more successful when it comes back to us. So I'm inclined to support that because that's the least risky option. But I don't understand what the conditions would look like that we're adding when what has been proposed is very robust. And other than putting a 50-centimetre bund around the building, I can't think what other conditions you might introduce that would make this any more robust. So in my mind, I'm thinking, are we delaying this with some conditions that perhaps don't offer any significant strength to the application that we put before the government, and we're delaying it by 6 weeks? that's the bit I don't understand. What could come back that would make this any more robust than it is now, that is causing us to delay? And as I'm willing to second Anne, because I feel we could make progress now.
Yeah, go ahead, Anne.
If I move an amendment, and Paul's kindly said second, just to clarify, my amendment would be if it's going for a condition, if it comes back, I want it approved by, or to come before is the right words, not approved. I'm not putting words in anybody's mouths. Please don't think I'm doing that, or making their minds up for them. It would come back before the convener and the vice convener for decision, and not come back to the committee. That would be my amendment. But we need to break out and discuss this more.
Okay, Peter, you wanted to come in? Yeah. No, you're happy with that? Okay, right. So we're going to break out. I'll give everyone a chance, but a comfort break as well. Yeah, Paul's already second. Yeah. How long? 15 minutes? 5 minutes.
Sorry, can I just ask another question? Because this is really complicated in my mind. So, if we come back with a condition on the flooding, does the local authority have to be consulted and SEPA have to be consulted?
So as part of preparing the conditions, we will be consulting the consultees that we're supposed to consult. We'll take account of that advice. Now, then we'll come up with conditions. Sorry, we understand the committee's intention and desire to approve this, though. So what SEPA or the flood team come back with, if that's incompatible with the committee's decision, then we will provide some word of condition that we think delivers what you want on this. It may not be what SEPA or the flood team look for in that, but we need to have that information, because they may well say they're satisfied with the technical measures that have been in place. They maintain their objection. They don't have any comments on them.
Okay,
so, we would want that information, because it's undertaking the process to its logical conclusion, and it allows you to take that decision in light of all the facts, which I think strengthens your decision at the end of the day, and also strengthens the applicant's position.
I accept that, but for those of us around this table that are councillors, and some of us are, we would at planning meetings have conditions at the planning meeting, that the planning officers would come up with it. So, there doesn't seem to be anything here that's really overcomplicated. Can we not have a breakout to talk about the conditions and then just do it all today instead of delaying it to come back? Sorry, I'm being really difficult.
I don't think that you're talking about applications where there's an objection from SEPA on principle of flood risk, though, probably.
Duncan, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, it's just, if this was, I'm also trying to wrap my head around this, but if it was to be deferred and then you go back and SEPA then, because they've not commented on that extra flood risk one, they could look at that in more depth and actually be satisfied with that, and then it would come back to this committee and it might not actually need to go to ministers at all if they were actually satisfied with it.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. The fact of the matter is that the site can flood, and that this is about principle. But you've seen, and you have been, I suppose, you are reassured by the evidence the applicants put forward to say how they are planning to manage this risk in practice. We'll be looking for advice on the sort of technical elements of that from SEPA and the flood team, and they may well say that's satisfactory insofar as those measures would deal with the risk like that, but they still maintain their objection in principle. So that I don't think that that's going to change. I suspect that will be maintained, but we may have useful information that helps define the conditions that are attached.
Okay, thank you. Paul, you want to come in quickly?
Yeah, it's just really that Duncan triggered that. So I did ask the question when the presentation was made by the applicant, that have you consulted and are these accepted by other consultees? Your proposals meet no objection. No, you've made changes to satisfy all parties, and the answer is yes. They haven't come back and said no, that still doesn't work. So I felt that when we were at that point in the debate, that we had information that those other parties were comfortable with what was being proposed and that it did meet the criteria.
I think they have said they object in principle, so they're not considering those matters. So we would be going back and asking them to, in light of the committee's decision in principle, we'd be asking them for advice on the conditions that we would attach.
But won't they forever and a day object in principle because it floods? They could build it 10 metres high, but they still object because it has a 1 in 200 year potential to flood.
That's correct, and we're not trying to remove their objection. We're seeking further advice from them. So they're different questions. Okay, so I'm going to call that there. We're going to have a breakout. I'll give everyone 10 minutes. Yeah, yeah, because there's a couple of things there. Right, so if we meet back here at 11:36. Thank you.
Right, thanks everyone. Sorry about the delay. So now that we're back, Anne, would you like to say something?
I'm happy. I'm happy with the discussions that have taken place and to support a motion that's coming forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're at the stage now where we have to ask committee members if they're content to take forward the officer's recommendation and refuse the application. And we have an amendment from Eleanor. Eleanor, would you like to speak to your amendment, please?
Yeah, the amendment that we spoke about during the discussion has changed slightly. I am now putting forward an amendment for approval in principle, subject to a full suite of conditions coming forward at our next meeting, which will be in June. Okay. And the reason for that is, although this application does not comply fully with MPF 4 Policy 22, it can, well, when you're looking at the mitigation requirement, it can comply with that mitigation. Also, the application is strong and it complies fully with a lot of our LDP policies and other policies contained within MPF 4. So assessed overall, we feel that the application complies with the development plan as a whole.
Right, thank you, Eleanor. Okay, shall we move to a vote?
Chris Beattie.
Amendment.
Jiva Blackett.
Amendment.
Amendment.
Sandy Bremner.
Amendment.
Jackie Brereton.
Amendment.
Peter Cosgrove.
Amendment.
Kenny Deans.
Amendment.
Paul Gibb.
Amendment.
Russell Jones.
Amendment.
John Kirk.
Amendment.
Laura McCallum.
Amendment.
Eleanor McIntosh.
Amendment.
Fiona McLean.
Amendment.
Duncan Miller.
Amendment.
Anne Ross.
Amendment.
Derek Ross.
Amendment.
Okay, that's everyone. Well, in that case, the amendment's carried, so this will come back once we have a full suite of conditions for us to consider. Hopefully it'll be at the next planning committee. Optimistically, my notes say the target time for that was 30 minutes. Not bad. Okay, so we will move on to item number 6, which is the application for detailed plan permission 2025/0008/DET, and that is for a proposed telecommunications installation comprising of a new 15-metre high lattice tower on a new concrete base, 3 shared antennas, 2 dishes, 4 cabinets, 2 9-metre microturbines, a solar array, 1 generator compound, and ancillary development at land at Gaelcarn Lower, Glenann Estate, Inchurry Lodge, Tomintoul, Ballindarachmore. And this is again going to be introduced by Katie.
Thank you. Yes, so this proposal is for a telecommunications installation. This is the application site, which I appreciate doesn't show an awful lot, but it's located near the summit of Gaelcarn, a hilltop located in Glenann, which is approximately 8 kilometres southwest of Tomintoul. You can see a little bit more context there, but I appreciate it doesn't show a lot. So this is the aerial view. The site is on an exposed heather-covered hilltop in an undeveloped, open and quite expansive upland landscape. Just by way of context, the site is located within the Cairngorms Massive Special Protection Area, designated as such because of the presence of breeding golden eagles. It's also in close proximity to the Cairngorm Special Area of Conservation, the River Spey Special Protection Area, and Inchrory Site of Special Scientific Interest. It's also located near an area of nationally important carbon-rich soils, deep peat and priority peatland habitat, which is designated by NatureScot. So hopefully this provides a little bit more location context. You can see Tomintoul right up at the top there, and then this is the access track to the proposed MASS site, which lies sort of to the south of around 8 kilometres to the south of Tomintoul. Okay, so this is the site plan, as you can see. So the proposal is for a 15-metre high lattice telecommunications mast, including telecommunications equipment, antennas, dishes and ancillary development within a fenced compound. The proposed lattice mast, which is right, that little triangle right in the middle there, will accommodate 3 antenna and 2 transmission dishes, and will be placed within a levelled compound surrounded by a 1.8 metre high deer fence enclosure. There will be 2 11-metre high wind turbines, which you can see on the left there. It's not pointing. You can see on the left there, which will both be located within an individual levelled compound surrounded by 1.8 metre deer fenced enclosures. There will also be a solar panel array, which will be located in another separate levelled compound surrounded by 1.8 metre high deer fence, and that's on the right. Again, I don't know if I can show it there. Yep, which you can just see on the right of the site plan there. Okay. So just before I go through the elevations, you may have noticed looking at the plans already, but I'm just highlighting that there are some irregularities with these elevations. So whilst the site plan shows, you can see 2 wind turbines there, the elevations show 1 or none. And again, should the committee seek to approve, then these discrepancies would have to be addressed. So this is the southern elevation. Again, you can see the mast there, with the compound, with its compound, and then I think one of the turbines. This is the western elevation. Again, you can see the mast. It's not showing the wind turbines, but you can see the separate enclosure for the solar panels. And northern elevation, again, the mast, no wind turbines, but you can see it is showing the solar panels kind of in part of the solar panels enclosure to the left. And finally, the eastern elevation, and again, you can see the solar panel enclosure with the separate mast enclosure. So, just going through some of the photos. This is the track leading up towards the mast. Now, I don't know if you can see right up there, which is much clearer with the eye, is an existing telecommunications mast. The proposal site is around here. You can't quite see it, but just to give you a sense of where it would be located, and also in relation to that existing mast. So off the track that you've just seen, there's a separate track that takes you directly to the mast site, which is what is being shown here, and it sort of curves round to the left there. And this is just the top of the sort of mound, and then you can see the mast site is just located here at the tip of that sort of turning area. So and that's the mast site a little bit more closely and hopefully clearly. Look, and that's a view from it looking north. So this is the mast site itself, just to show a bit of the ground cover there. And this is the view from the mast site, looking sort of southeast. I think it's more eastwards actually. Again, you can just get a sense of its elevation there. And this is from the mast site looking back up the track. So again, the access track is taken from kind of the other side of this mound, and it comes down to that turning area there. So in terms of the principle, there are a number of policies relevant to this proposal, including National Planning Framework for Policy 24 for digital infrastructure, which supports proposals for digital infrastructure across Scotland, in particularly areas with no or low connectivity capacity. However, in line with the National Parks Local Development Plan Policy 6 for the siting and design of digital communications equipment, this is subject to detailed consideration of the siting design and likely impacts of the proposal. In terms of design, the proposed design and materials of the development are purely functional and will appear incongruous in its rural and natural setting, which is compounded by the site location, which is an undeveloped hilltop. While supporting design and access information has been provided, it's generic in nature and doesn't provide a rationale for the site selection or for the proposed design. So there are not any particular design aspects which could, for example, be addressed through amendments or planning conditions. In addition, the submitted landscape and visual impact assessment does not accord with good practice, and it omits a detailed assessment of effects on the Cairngorms wildland area, which is around 1 kilometre from the site, and any cumulative assessment of this. There are therefore no mitigation has been incorporated into the design to address any impacts on the wildland area. So the proposal is therefore contrary to a number of policies in respect of design, on the basis that its design scale and nature, which is incongruous with its setting, and will have a detrimental impact on visual amenity and landscape. In terms of landscape, as already highlighted, the proposal is of a functional design and by its nature is relatively large and imposing. However, no site-specific landscape or visual impact mitigations have been included with the design. Whilst the landscape and visual impact, as mentioned, whilst the landscape and visual impact assessment has been provided, it doesn't adhere to best practice and doesn't include a number of key aspects which would be expected, such as a detailed analysis of landscape and visual sensitivity, visualisations or an assessment of likely effects on the wildland area. The National Parks Landscape Advisor concludes that the effect on some of the special landscape qualities on the Cairngorms National Park and indirect effect on part of the Cairngorms wildland area will be adverse, although it's not possible, given the deficiency of the information provided, to make a judgment as to the degree of the significance of these effects. In addition, the LVIA's assessment of effects on visual amenity considered visual receptors to be of low sensitivity. However, CMPA's landscape advisor states that this would not be the case, as the receptors affected by the proposed development are likely to comprise walkers and cyclists using the hills for recreation, and the viewpoints lie in a national park, factors which would increase the sensitivity to high. Therefore, the LVIA conclusions with regards to sensitivity of receptors and the likely visual effects of the proposal on these receptors are not supported. Overall, the information provided in relation to landscape and visual impacts is not satisfactory. In addition to the omissions mentioned, it doesn't include any assessment of cumulative landscape and visual effects with the existing mast that as shown in the photographs to the south of the development site, or an additional proposed mast application from the same applicant adjacent to that existing, to the mast that's already there. So effectively you would be looking at 3 within a very small area. On account of the proposed development scale, siting, design and materials, it's not in keeping with its setting and is likely to have a detrimental landscape and visual impacts. No landscape mitigations have been proposed or included within the design, and therefore it's contrary to the relevant National Planning Framework 4 and Local Development Plan landscape policies. In respect of impacts on environment and ecology, by virtue of introducing development into a currently undeveloped moorland, will result in a net loss of biodiversity. The baseline information provided with the application cannot be supported due to inaccuracies within it, and the impacts of the proposal are expected to be more significant than set out. The application site is located within the Cairngorms Massive Special Protection Area, designated due to regularly supporting a population of breeding golden eagles. The ecology information makes no reference to this. This is a significant omission given that the proposal includes high structures in the form of a mast and 2 turbines. Therefore, the proposal may have an unacceptable detrimental impact on protected species, nationally and internationally designated sites with no proposed or acceptable mitigation, which is contrary to the local development plans policy for natural heritage. It also doesn't demonstrate that it will conserve, restore or enhance biodiversity or minimise detrimental impacts on biodiversity, nature networks and the natural environment through its planning and design. So it doesn't comply with NPF 4 policies 3 for biodiversity and 4 for natural places. In addition, the submitted peat management plan appears to only assess the impacts of the spot location of the proposed mast in detail, so 1 point. So no assessment of the full application site, so the full red line boundary has been provided. And the definitions of deep peat is in their management plan is inconsistent with Nature Scott's definition. I think the difference is about 50 centimetres. And it doesn't follow the mitigation hierarchy or meet the requirements of NPF 4 policy 5 for soils and the local development plans policy 10 resources. So overall, there are some clear gaps in the information provided, which means it is not possible to state with certainty that the proposal would not have a detrimental impact on biodiversity, ecology and the surrounding environment, and therefore does not meet the requirements of the relevant National Planning Framework 4 and local development plan policies. And finally, in respect of access, the National Parks Recreation and Outdoor Access Officer highlights that the proposed development has the potential to negatively impact upon visitor experience of a number of paths and routes, including a core path, it's called CC6, which runs from Glenanne in Tomintoul to Invercald, as well as a couple of rights of way and a heritage path and a hill path following a similar route. So the installation of a telecoms mast, 2 turbines and the associated infrastructure would negatively impact on visitor and user experience of the core paths and therefore negatively impact on the experiences of park visitors and other receptors, which is in contradiction to one of the National Park's stated aims to promote understanding and enjoyment, including enjoyment in the form of recreation of the special qualities of the area by the public. So taking into account all of the above, it is recommended that this application is refused.
Thank you, Katie. Do we have questions for Katie? I've got Jiva, Eleanor and Pete.
Yeah, thank you, Katie. A lot of the communities around there suffer from a lack of mobile reception, and I'm just wondering, is this part of what's happening all over the countryside, which is where the masts are going in to link that up, and our emergency provision, you know, that there's, I know the emergency services, so there's one, for instance, on the A93 at Crathy, which was put there by the emergency services so that they could link up their calls. I'm just not clear what this mast is for, other than just general communications.
My understanding that this is just for general communications. It's not being proposed by being proposed by a network provider, and I'm not entirely sure. It's not been made clear what the relationship is between this and another one that they're proposing just beyond this one. I'm afraid I can't answer that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Eleanor.
Yeah, I know this area really well, and the photos don't do it justice, Katie. I'm sorry if you took them. Absolutely don't do it justice. I totally support your recommendation, and there is mobile coverage up there, good mobile coverage. But my question is to you in paragraph 22, where you say you've consulted with Glenlivet and Inverran Community Council. No. It should be Michael and Inverran Community Association. You're in the wrong community, and there is no community council in Glenlivet either. It's community associations, but it should have been Kirkmichael and Tomintoul.
Apologies, we'll look into that and make sure that we've got the right.
It's happened before, so I really think there needs to be a correction in your system somewhere, because I've pulled this up before.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Eleanor. Pete.
Thank you for that, Katie. I'll commend you on a systematic and objective report, which helps the committee make a decision on this one. I feel quite straightforward. I just wanted to confirm that the applicant didn't provide a list of alternative locations for this mast as part of their planning application, as they're required to do. Is that the case?
You are correct. No, they did not.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Russell.
Yeah, thanks, Katie, and I also support your recommendation. I think it's quite straightforward. I just wondered, though, I mean, I see it's EE that have applied for this, and it's my understanding that there are 4 main network providers now, and they're all supposed to look to share these masts. Has there been any indication that they were looking to share with anyone else, or because if they got one, then someone else could say that they would need to have one if they get one, and I hope they don't?
Yeah, no, this is a bit of an issue. We have had a little bit of difficulty engaging with the applicants, and to get that information. I think we had advised previously, because we would like to promote sharing of masts. So it's given that there's another mast so close, we would probably have liked to have even had an explanation as to why that can't be utilised. But yeah, you're quite right in what is supposed to be done. But whether that's what is being done is another matter.
John.
It was just a quick one. With the copper network being shut down by BT, will this have an effect on the area? You know, we've all telephones at the moment, but we're all told that when power shuts down, we'll have nothing. But this is quite a worrying thing. Do we know what the situation there is?
Sorry, I don't know if anyone else knows. No. Yeah, sorry, I don't have an answer to that. I'm not sure what the position is.
Okay, thank you, Katie. No further questions, anyone? Nope. Okay, so we'll move into the discussion phase. Does anyone want to raise anything? Jiva?
I'm happy to go with the officer's recommendation and refuse this application.
Microphone. Sense in the room is that we're happy with the officer's recommendation to refuse the proposed telecommunications installation 2025-0008 DET. Happy with that? Agree. Right, super. Okay, move on to item number 7, AOCB. David, I think you've got some things for us there.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Just very, very quickly, it's just to point out to members that we've recently received decisions from the Energy Consent Unit in Scottish Government about 3 energy infrastructure developments located just outside of the National Park. That's the Rothes 3 wind farm variation, the Erba pump storage hydro scheme, and the Urak wind farm, all of which have been approved. As a park authority, we didn't object to any of those developments, but just for information, I wanted to pass that on. And I'll circulate the decision notices after the committee, just in case members want to read into that in more detail. But that was all from me.
Okay, thank you, David. Do we have any other business from members?
Could I just ask a question?
Sure.
David, the transmission for the Erba is within the park.
The connection element to that, yeah, I think we've had some recent correspondence around that, which we'd be looking at. But this was for the hydro scheme itself outside of the park.
Okay, Kate. Right. Any other business? Nope. Okay, so that's the end of the public part of the Planning Committee meeting. We'll now move to consider the minute of the confidential session of 14th of March 2025 in a closed session. For any members of the public, the date of our next meeting will be the 13th of June 2025. And can I ask